copper, and rusted iron. That is what the world usually smells like when you are merely trying to survive. But tonight, those harsh metallic notes were drowned out by roasted garlic brown butter and the cloying sweetness of $1,000 vintage Bordeaux. I balanced the heavy silver tray against my hip, gritting my teeth as a sudden sharp kick rolled directly beneath my ribs. I was supposed to be a ghost, just another nameless, faceless server navigating the softly lit velvet-draped dining room of Le Ciel Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant. Fluorescent lights had hummed an erratic insect-like buzz in the kitchen just moments ago, but out here, the air was perfectly climate-controlled, cool and thick, with the low murmuring hum of Wall Street money and political power. Beneath my cheap polyester uniform vest, a thick layer of medical elastic binding wrapped tightly around my midsection. It wasn't tight enough to hurt the pup, but it was suffocatingly snug, flattening the soft, prominent swell of my 5-month pregnancy into something that merely looked like stress-induced weight gain. My center of gravity was entirely off. My feet, crammed into discount rubber-soled shoes, throbbed with a dull, rhythmic ache. To mask my natural scent, I had scrubbed my skin raw with harsh industrial strength blockers. I smelled faintly of rubbing alcohol and stale vanilla, a pathetic, sterile shell of the sweet rain and blooming jasmine that used to drive alphas mad. That used to drive one alpha mad. Table 4 needs the decanted Bordeaux. Move, the floor manager had hissed. So I kept my head down, navigating between the tables, the heavy tray balanced on my left palm, the crystal decanter in my right. Table 4 was tucked into an exclusive alcove near the floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the rain-slicked, neon-lit streets of Midtown Manhattan. As I closed the distance, the air pressure in the room violently shifted. It wasn't a metaphorical feeling. It was a tangible, crushing drop in the atmosphere that made the fine hairs on my arms stand straight up. My omega biology, suppressed and battered by months of chemical blockers and sheer exhaustion, gave a desperate visceral lurch. Crushed cedar wood, black pepper, cold biting winter frost. My breath caught in my throat like shattered glass. I stopped dead in my tracks 3 feet from the table. My chest tightened so fast I thought my ribs might splinter. No, it couldn't be. I forced my eyes up, fighting every primal instinct screaming at me to bolt toward the service elevator. Sitting in the plush leather booth, his impossibly broad shoulders stretching the seams of a bespoke charcoal suit, was Vance. Vance, the ruthless head of New York's most violent underground syndicate. The man who had worn my wedding ring for 3 years. The man who had signed our divorce papers without even looking me in the eye. The sounds of the restaurant instantly faded into a rushing underwater static. Vance looked harder than he had 6 months ago. The sharp, aristocratic planes of his jaw were shadowed with heavy stubble. He was staring down at his phone, his thumb swiping aggressively across the screen, barking a low, gravelly order about shipping containers in Brooklyn. Beside him sat Victoria. She was a high society political heiress, breathtaking in a sterile, manicured way. She wore an immaculate silk dress, a diamond tennis bracelet glittering under the ambient light as she laughed, resting her perfectly polished hand on Vance's forearm. The fake fiancé, the media shield, a sudden aggressive kick hit me from the inside, striking right against my bladder. The pup was reacting to the immediate proximity of its sire tossing restlessly in the amniotic fluid. I bit the inside of my cheek hard enough to taste the rusty tang of blood. "Do not fall apart here," I ordered myself. Taking a shaky breath, I forced my aching legs to step forward. I pitched my voice an octave lower than my natural tone, keeping my eyes fixed firmly on the pristine white tablecloth. "Good evening." The Bordeaux. Finally! Victoria sighed, not even bothering to glance up. "Just pour it." I stepped into the narrow space between Vance's broad back and the window. The heat radiating off the alpha's body was immense, smelling of danger and a heartbreaking, agonizing comfort. My hand trembled violently as I reached over to pour Victoria's glass. Then I had to lean slightly over Vance's shoulder to reach his. As I did, my stomach, the firm, rounded bump hidden beneath layers of agonizing elastic and cheap polyester, brushed imperceptibly against the back of his chair. Vance inhaled. It was a sharp, sudden, jagged sound. He stopped speaking mid-sentence. I froze the lip of the decanter hovering over his crystal glass. A single drop of dark red wine fell splashing violently against the rim. The scent blockers I used were strong, but they were breaking down under my cold sweat. Beneath the rubbing alcohol, there was the faint, desperate scent of a pregnant omega in severe distress. Vance slowly lowered his phone. He turned his head. Our eyes met. His pale, striking gray eyes, usually as cold and unreadable as concrete, underwent a violent tectonic shift. Irritation morphed into confusion, then shock, and finally a raw, naked, devastating horror. He took in my sallow skin, the purple bruises under my eyes, the awkward, protective way my free arm hovered over my midsection, and the boxy, unnatural shape of my torso. "Liam," he whispered, the name scraped out of his throat, sounding completely foreign. His large hand twitched, striking the edge of his water glass. The heavy crystal-tipped, dumping freezing ice water straight across the table and splashing directly onto Victoria's lap. "Oh my God, are you blind?" Victoria shrieked, jumping up as the icy water soaked through her designer silk dress. But Vance didn't look at her. He didn't even hear her. The terrifying Mafia boss was sitting there with his mouth slightly open, looking completely unmoored. The alpha in him was rapidly calculating the timeline. 6 months since the divorce. 6 months since he threw me away. What are you?" Vance started, his voice cracking, entirely devoid of his usual absolute command. He stood up abruptly, his massive frame towering over me. The smell of his chaotic, panicked pheromones was suffocating. "Why are you wearing this? Why do you smell like chemicals? You are coming with me. Right now." He reached out his hand, wrapping around my wrist like a warm, inescapable vice. The dining room fell into a dead hush. Victoria was still screaming about the price of her ruined dress, demanding the manager fire me on the spot. Vance was pulling me, his eyes wild with a desperate need to lock me away in a golden cage to protect what was his. 6 months ago, the sheer terror and humiliation of this moment would have crushed me. I would have wept. I would have let him drag me into the rainy night. But today, standing here with an aching back, a protesting bladder, and the violent nausea of my second trimester, I just felt profoundly, utterly annoyed. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I let out a long, exhausted sigh and calmly wrenched my wrist out of his grip. Ignoring his stunned expression, I reached into the deep pocket of my stained apron. I bypassed the cheap order pad and pulled out a heavy matte metal card. It was an American Express Centurion Black Card, the kind with no credit limit, issued only by invitation to the world's most elite billionaires. I casually tossed it onto the wet tablecloth. It landed with a heavy, satisfying sound beside the spilled water. "Swipe it," I said, my voice cold, steady, and entirely indifferent. "Pay for her ruined dress. And while you're at it, charge the cleaning fee for the mess this alpha just made in my restaurant." The heavy matte titanium of the American Express Centurion card seemed to absorb the dim ambient lighting of the restaurant. It lay there against the water-stained white linen, a tiny dark monolith of absolute financial supremacy. For 3 agonizingly long seconds, the alcove was entirely silent. Even the ambient hum of Wall Street elites dining around us seemed to flatline. What is this?" Victoria sputtered, her perfectly contoured face twisted into an ugly mask of confusion and outrage. She looked from the card to my stained uniform and then to Vance. "Is this a joke? Vance, your busboy, is throwing stolen credit cards at us." Vance didn't hear her. His pale gray eyes were locked onto the small silver-embossed letters on the black metal. Liam Sterling, my maiden name. The name I had ruthlessly reclaimed the second the ink was dry on our divorce papers. The terrifying Mafia boss, a man who regularly ordered the dismantling of rival cartels before his morning espresso, looked as though I had just shot him point-blank in the chest. His jaw worked silently, his alpha instincts previously raging with a desperate territorial need to snatch me up and hide me away, were suddenly crashing headfirst into a reality that made 0 sense to his primeval brain. Before Vance could formulate a sentence, the heavy mahogany doors of the kitchen swung open. Henri, the general manager of Le Ciel, practically sprinted across the dining room floor. He completely bypassed the angry, dripping political heiress and the towering, furious Mafia boss. Henri stopped in front of me, his face pale, and bowed perfectly from the waist. "Monsieur Liam, I am so profoundly sorry." Henri gasped, his French accent thickening with panic. The security team was monitoring the cameras. We did not realize the alpha at table 4 was becoming aggressive. "Are you hurt? Is the pup—" "I am fine, Henri." I interrupted smoothly, my voice shedding the faux submissive octave I used for waiting tables. I dropped the heavy silver tray onto the nearest empty table with a loud clatter. "But I am done playing undercover for tonight. My back is killing me, and this vest is a medieval torture device. Victoria gasped, her manicured hand flying to her chest. Monsieur, what are you talking about? He is a waiter. He is the owner, Madame A. Henri snapped his deference, vanishing instantly as he glared at her. Monsieur Liam owns the entire Le Ciel hospitality group. Now I must ask you to lower your voice. I watched the exact moment Vance's entire worldview violently fractured. He stumbled back half a step, his heavy dress shoes scraping against the polished hardwood. Owner, Vance rasped. The word sounded like ash in his mouth. He looked at the cheap, grease-stained apron tied around my waist. You own this place, but you are working the floor. You are wearing polyester. I know it is a tragic fabric, I said dryly, reaching behind my back to untie the apron. I threw it onto the chair next to him. As for why I am serving tables, blame your heir. For the last 2 months, the only thing I can keep down without violently vomiting is Chef Marcel's duck confit and his roasted garlic truffle butter. If I stay in the penthouse, I starve. If I work the floor, the smell of the kitchen actually makes me hungry. Plus, it is a great way to audit my staff's customer service. I took a deep breath, my hands moving to the heavy Velcro straps of the medical binder hidden beneath my shirt. I didn't care that we were in the middle of the dining room. I didn't care about Victoria's gawking. I was suffocating, and I was done hiding. I gripped the edge of the thick elastic and ripped it backward. The loud tearing sound of the adhesive echoed sharply. The instant the compression vanished, I let out a long, shuddering gasp. My lungs finally expanded to their full capacity. The heavy, swollen curve of my 5-month pregnancy, restricted for 9 hours, dropped forward, rounding out into its natural, undeniable shape beneath the thin cotton of my shirt. Simultaneously, the physical seal on my scent broke. The harsh, sterile smell of rubbing alcohol evaporated instantly, replaced by a staggering, overwhelming tidal wave of pure, distressed omega pheromones, sweet rain, blooming jasmine, and the heavy, intoxicating richness of an omega carrying an alpha's pup hit the air. Vance let out a choked, desperate sound. His knees actually buckled a fraction of an inch. His eyes dilated, the irises turning nearly pitch black, as the scent of his own unborn child hit his olfactory glands. He reached out his massive hands, trembling violently, instinctively wanting to touch the very belly I had just freed. "Don't," I ordered. My voice wasn't loud, but it possessed the razor-sharp edge of absolute authority. Vance froze his hands, hovering in the air. "I bought this restaurant chain with the divorce settlement you so graciously forced upon me," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "I didn't freeze Vance. I didn't crawl into an alley to die just because you decided my sensitivities were a liability to your empire. I took your blood money, I laundered it straight through Wall Street, and I multiplied it by 10. I turned to Henri, who was flanked by 4 massive earpiece-wearing security guards who had silently materialized from the shadows. "Henri, run the black card for her dress," I instructed coldly. "Then have security escort Mr. Sterling and his shield off my property. If they resist, call the police. Let us see how the Mafia boss likes making front-page news for harassing a pregnant Omega." "Yes, monsieur." Henri nodded sharply. I didn't wait to watch them be thrown out. I turned on my heel, ignoring the sharp twinge in my round ligaments, and walked away. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in the back of my armored Maybach. I had changed into a pair of oversized cashmere sweatpants and a thick, ridiculously expensive wool sweater. The heated leather seats warmed my aching lower back. I closed my eyes, one hand resting gently over my stomach, soothing the pup who was still doing frantic somersaults from the sudden spike in its sire's pheromones. "Monsieur Liam." The voice of Marcus, my head of security, came through the intercom from the front seat. "A black SUV is tailing us. It is Vance's detail." I opened my eyes, staring out at the blurred neon lights of Manhattan flashing by in the cold rain. "Let him follow. He can't get past the gates anyway." The drive to the Upper East Side was smooth and silent. My penthouse was a fortified fortress occupying the top 2 floors of a billionaire's row high-rise. It had a private elevator, retinal scanners, and a security detail comprised entirely of ex-military betas who didn't give a damn about alpha pheromones. When I stepped into the foyer, the warm climate-controlled air smelled of sandalwood and expensive tea. Dr. Eris, my private concierge physician, was already waiting on the plush velvet sofa, sipping a cup of chamomile. "Your heart rate monitor pinged my phone," Dr. Eris said, mildly opening his medical bag. I assume the undercover waiter gig hit a snag." "You could say that," I muttered, sinking into the armchair opposite him. He ran a quick, cool ultrasound wand over my stomach. The fast, strong beating sound of the pup's heartbeat filled the quiet room. It was the only sound in the world that could instantly extinguish the fire of my anger. "Pup is perfect, just agitated. Your cortisol levels spiked," Eris noted, wiping the gel away. "Get some rest, Liam." After the doctor left, I walked over to the massive floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The rain was coming down in freezing sheets, slicking the pavement below. I looked down at the street level 30 stories below. Parked illegally by the curb directly under the harsh glare of a streetlight was a black SUV. Standing outside it, completely ignoring the freezing rain soaking his bespoke suit, was Vance. He was just standing there, his broad shoulders slumped, staring up at my building. He looked incredibly small against the towering monolith of glass and steel. He had expected to find a broken canary. He had expected to swoop in play the brutal but merciful savior and lock me back in a gilded cage. Instead, he had crashed headfirst into an eagle's nest he could not reach, built entirely out of the wreckage he had left behind. I placed my palm flat against the cold, bulletproof glass, staring down at the Mafia boss drowning in the rain. The game had changed, and this time I held all the cards. For a man who had built an empire on breaking down doors, Vance was surprisingly terrible at sitting still. It started 3 days after the incident with the spilled Bordeaux. I had officially retired my tragic polyester uniform and returned to my rightful place as the owner of Le Ciel, managing the floor in a sharply tailored, loose-fitting Tom Ford suit that accommodated my growing waistline. And every night, at exactly 7 o'clock, the terrifying head of New York's underworld walked into my restaurant. He didn't bring his heavily armed entourage. He didn't demand the VIP alcove. He simply sat at a small corner table, ordered a single glass of sparkling water, and watched me. Monsieur Liam," Henri whispered, sidling up next to me near the hostess stand. He looked like he was one stress-induced ulcer away from a heart attack. "He is here again. He is scaring the Wall Street bankers at table 9 just by breathing. Shall I call security?" I glanced over the rim of my tablet. Vance was wearing a dark, tailored trench coat, his broad shoulders practically eclipsing the delicate French dining chair. He wasn't glaring, but his resting face was inherently lethal. Yet beneath the stoic Mafia facade, I could see the dark circles under his striking gray eyes. He looked exhausted, starved even. "Leave him, Henri." I sighed, rubbing a hand over my lower abdomen where the pup was currently practicing kickboxing against my bladder. "If he wants to pay $100 for a glass of Pellegrino just to stare at the wall, let him fund my maternity leave." I thought the daily stalking was the peak of my week's absurdity. I was wrong. The true climax of the ridiculous arrived on Thursday afternoon in the form of 5'9" of blonde ambition and weaponized stilettos. Victoria marched into the restaurant, completely bypassing the hostess. She wasn't wearing a terrified, victimized expression. She looked like a woman on a mission. I braced myself. I fully expected a screaming match, perhaps a lawsuit threat from her DA father, or at the very least, a glass of champagne thrown in my face. I discreetly signaled my security detail to stand by. Victoria stopped a foot away from me, her manicured hands on her hips, her designer sunglasses pushed up into her perfect hair. She looked me up and down, taking in the bespoke suit, the Patek Philippe watch on my wrist, and the unmistakable glow of a billionaire who no longer gave a damn. "You?" she said, her voice dropping the shrill, high society pitch. "You are the phantom buyer who acquired the Le Ciel Group, the one my father's hedge fund friends have been trying to unmask for months." "I am," I replied evenly, crossing my arms over my chest. "If you are here for an apology regarding the dress, you can forward the dry cleaning bill to my attorneys." Victoria stared at me for a long, calculating moment. Then, to my absolute horror, she threw her head back and let out a sharp, genuine laugh. "An apology, please. That dress was last season anyway," she scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. She leaned in closer, the scent of expensive Chanel perfume cutting through the restaurant's ambient aromas. "Do you have any idea how exhausting it is to pretend to be engaged to a man who communicates purely in grunts and death threats? I only agreed to the PR stunt because my father needed the syndicate's backing for his campaign. But Vance, he is a brick wall with a gun." I blinked, genuinely thrown off balance. "Excuse me." "I broke off the engagement this morning," Victoria declared proudly, inspecting her perfectly filed nails. "The moment I realized you weren't some pathetic, destitute ex-husband but an actual self-made Wall Street predator with liquid assets. Darling, I knew exactly which side of the divorce I wanted to be on." Before I could process her words, she linked her arm through mine. "Cancel your afternoon meetings, Liam. Your maternity wardrobe is a tragedy of neutral tones, and we are going to Bergdorf Goodman. I need a new shopping partner, and frankly, you have better taste than anyone in my zip code." And just like that, the terrifying Mafia boss's fake fiancé defected. The next 3 hours were a surreal high-fashion fever dream. Victoria and I swept through Fifth Avenue like a hurricane with a limitless credit line. She was viciously funny, fiercely practical, and completely unfazed by my pregnancy. As I sat on a velvet-tufted sofa in a VIP fitting room sipping sparkling cider while she tried on an absurdly feathered coat, she texted Vance, "Currently spending your ex-husband's millions. He looks radiant. You look like a fool. Do not call me again." She showed me the screen, laughing loudly. I couldn't help it. I laughed so hard my stomach ached, the pup rolling happily in response to the sudden burst of endorphins. For the first time in 6 months, the heavy, suffocating shadow of the syndicate felt thousands of miles away. But the reality of my biology always had a way of crashing the party. By 9 o'clock that night, the adrenaline of the shopping spree had completely faded. I was back in my penthouse, standing in the middle of my massive state-of-the-art kitchen. My feet were swollen to the size of watermelons, sending sharp, shooting pains up my calves. The medical elastic bands around my ankles felt like barbed wire. Worse than the pain was the hunger. It wasn't a normal craving. It was a vicious, hollow, clawing demand from the pup that made my hands shake. I didn't want the Michelin-starred meals stored in my fridge. I wanted something highly specific, something cheap-heavy, and inherently New York. The intercom on the wall buzzed. "Monsieur Liam," Marcus's voice crackled through the speaker. He sounded uncharacteristically hesitant. "Vance is in the lobby. He doesn't have his security detail. He requested permission to come up." "Absolutely not," I snapped, rubbing my aching lower back. "Tell him to go home, Marcus." "Understood, sir." Marcus paused. "He said to tell you he went to Queens, to that specific 24-hour deli under the subway tracks. He has everything bagels, toasted with scallion cream cheese lox and capers." I froze. My mouth instantly watered. It was a highly specific, deeply irrational craving I used to have during my college days, a place Vance and I had gone to at 3 a.m. when we first started dating, back before the blood and the money ruined us. My pride screamed at me to tell Marcus to throw him out, but the pup gave a violent, demanding kick, and my stomach let out a treacherous rumble that echoed in the quiet kitchen. I closed my eyes, letting out a defeated sigh. "Send him up. Just him." 5 minutes later, the private elevator chimed. The heavy steel doors slid open and Vance stepped into my foyer. He looked entirely out of place in my pristine, modern sanctuary. His dark coat was damp from the rain, and his hair was slightly disheveled. But what struck me most wasn't his appearance. It was his scent. The crushing, dominant, terrifying alpha pheromones were completely dialed back, tightly controlled, emitting only a low, soothing hum of cedar and rain. He didn't stride forward and demand my submission. He stood at the edge of the kitchen island holding a greasy brown paper bag that radiated the heavenly scent of toasted garlic and onion. His gray eyes dropped to my feet, noticing the way I was shifting my weight to relieve the pressure on my swollen ankles. "Sit down, Liam," Vance said quietly. It wasn't an order, it was a plea. I hesitated, then slowly pulled out a bar stool and sat down at the marble island. Vance walked over, carefully placing the paper bag in front of me. He didn't hover. He took 2 deliberate steps back, giving me space, keeping his hands visibly at his sides. I opened the bag. The heat of the bagel hit my face, and I practically groaned. I took a bite, closing my eyes as the perfect combination of salt cream cheese and smoked salmon hit my tongue. It was heaven. Vance watched me eat in absolute silence. He didn't bring up the divorce. He didn't ask about the baby. He didn't mention Victoria's defection. When I finished the first half, I finally looked up at him. The man who used to command armies with a flick of his wrist was standing in my kitchen, dripping wet, just waiting to see if I needed a napkin. "You didn't poison it, did you?" I asked, my voice dry, breaking the heavy silence. The ghost of a smile touched the corner of Vance's mouth, a devastatingly handsome expression I hadn't seen in over a year. If I wanted to kill you, I wouldn't use carbs. It is too cruel." He looked down at my feet again. Slowly, he crouched down to the floor, resting on one knee. I stiffened, but he didn't reach for my stomach. Instead, his large, warm hands gently wrapped around my right ankle. His thumbs pressed into the swollen, aching muscles, applying the exact amount of pressure needed to relieve the tension. The relief was so sudden, so intensely euphoric that my breath hitched. "You are carrying my child," Vance murmured, his eyes fixed on the floor, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that vibrated straight through my bones. "You built an empire while I tore mine apart looking for you. I know you don't need my money, Liam. I know you don't need my protection." He switched to my left ankle, his thumbs working in slow, agonizingly perfect circles. "But you are tired," he continued softly, finally lifting his head to meet my eyes. The ruthless Mafia boss was entirely gone, replaced by a man drowning in his own collateral damage. "Let me help carry the weight, just for tonight." I looked down at him, feeling the warmth of his hands seeping into my skin, the scent of his cedar wood wrapping around me like a heavy protective blanket. The anger was still there, a hard knot in my chest, but the exhaustion was heavier. I didn't tell him I loved him. I didn't tell him all was forgiven. Instead, I picked up the second half of the bagel, leaned my elbows on the cool marble counter, and let the predator massage my feet. "If you press too hard on the Achilles," I whispered into the quiet kitchen, "I will have Marcus throw you off the balcony." Vance's grip softened immediately, his thumb tracing a gentle, reverent path over my skin. "Understood." The walls of my fortress were still standing, but for the first time I realized he wasn't trying to tear them down anymore. He was finally learning how to knock. The scent of fresh, imported white Alba truffles is incredibly distinct. It is earthy rich and smells like absolute unadulterated wealth. But this morning, standing in the stainless steel receiving bay of Le Ciel, the wooden crates delivered to my kitchen did not smell like truffles. They smelled like gasoline, damp ash, and cheap stale cigars. Henri stood beside me, his face a mask of pale horror. With a gloved hand, he pried open the lid of the top crate. Inside there were no truffles. Instead, resting on a bed of shredded newspaper, was a shattered crystal decanter, the exact same vintage of Bordeaux that had spilled on Victoria's dress weeks ago. Wrapped around the broken neck of the glass was a thick silver chain bearing the two-headed eagle crest of the Volkov Bratva, the Russian Mafia from Brooklyn. "Monsieur Liam," Henri whispered, his voice trembling. "All 4 of our supply trucks from the docks, they have been intercepted. The drivers were left tied up in Queens. This is a message." I stared at the broken glass. A cold, cynical irritation spiked in my chest. I had spent the last 6 months laundering money through Wall Street, dodging corporate audits, and building a legitimate hospitality empire. I did not have time for archaic, blood-soaked mob theatrics. Before I could instruct Henry to call my crisis management team, the heavy metal doors of the loading dock were violently thrown open. The air pressure in the room plummeted. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees in a single second. Vance strode in, flanked by Arthur and 4 heavily armed betas. The Alpha was not wearing his usual tailored suit. He was dressed in tactical black, a heavy Kevlar vest visible beneath his unzipped jacket. His pheromones were catastrophic, a blinding, suffocating blizzard of bitter frost, crushed cedar, and the sharp metallic tang of absolute murderous rage. He didn't look at Henry. He didn't look at the shattered glass. He locked his pitch-black eyes on me. "We are leaving." Vance commanded, his voice a low, vibrating snarl that made the stainless steel prep tables rattle. "Arthur has a helicopter waiting on the roof. You are going to the fortified compound in the Hamptons. You will stay there until I drown every last Volkov rat in the East River." He reached for my arm. I took a sharp step back, my bespoke Tom Ford suit jacket pulling tightly across my shoulders. The pup, agitated by the sudden explosion of violent alpha pheromones, delivered a sharp bruising kick to my ribs. I winced, placing a protective hand over my stomach, but I kept my chin raised. "Do not touch me, Vance." I warned, my voice cutting through the heavy air like a razor blade. "I am not going anywhere." Vance stopped, his jaw locking so hard I thought his teeth might shatter. "Liam, this is not a negotiation. The Bratva knows about you. They know you are carrying my heir. They are hitting your supply lines to draw me out. It is a classic ambush, and I will not let you be collateral damage again. You are getting on that helicopter." "Excuse me." I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that echoed off the tiled walls. "Collateral damage. I am the CEO of a billion-dollar conglomerate. I have a board meeting at 2 o'clock to acquire 3 new commercial properties in Manhattan. I am not running to a bunker in the Hamptons so you can play vigilante in Brooklyn. They will kill you, Vance roared, slamming his fist onto the nearest metal table. The sound was like a gunshot. Henry flinched, scrambling backward, but I stood my ground. They are hitting my businesses, Vance. I yelled back, the sweet rain of my omega pheromones suddenly spiking with the sharp, acidic scent of pure fury. My trucks, my money, and your first instinct is still to lock me in a cage while you handle the adults' work. You think a Kevlar vest and a gun make you the only protector in this room. You still look at me and see a fragile, tragic little Omega who needs to be hidden away. Vance stood frozen, his chest heaving. The violent blizzard of his scent clashed violently against my defensive pheromones. I look at you. Vance breathed, his voice suddenly cracking, the terrifying Mafia boss facade completely fracturing, and I see the only thing in this godforsaken world that I cannot survive losing. The absolute raw devastation in his voice made the anger in my throat evaporate. Vance raised a trembling hand, not to grab me, but to point a thick finger at his own temple, right at the jagged white scar that hadn't been there a year ago. "Do you know how I got this?" Vance asked, his voice dropping to a hoarse whisper. It wasn't a syndicate war. It wasn't a business deal gone wrong. It was 3 months after I forced you to sign those divorce papers. He took a slow, agonizing step forward. The murderous rage in his eyes had entirely dissolved, replaced by a haunting, hollow terror. I realized what I had done. I realized I had pushed you out into a world that would eat you alive, all because I thought my money would keep you warm. Vance confessed, his large hands shaking at his sides. I tore Manhattan apart looking for you. I went into Volkov territory blindly alone, chasing a rumor that an Omega matching your description was sleeping in a subway station. It was an ambush. They put a bullet a quarter inch from my brain. I bled out on the asphalt, Liam, and the only thing I could think about was that I was going to die without ever smelling rain and jasmine again. The loading dock was dead silent. Even Arthur and the armed guards had looked away, giving their boss a shred of privacy as he completely dismantled himself in front of me. "I am not trying to lock you in a cage to control you," Vance whispered, falling to his knees, right there on the grease-stained concrete floor of my loading dock. He looked up at me, his gray eyes shining with unshed tears. "I am trying to lock you away because I am a coward. Because if they touch you, if they touch him," he gestured weakly toward my swollen stomach, "there will be nothing left of me to bury." My breath hitched. The cold, cynical walls I had built around my heart over the last 6 months suddenly felt incredibly fragile. I looked down at the man kneeling at my feet, the ruthless predator stripped of his pride, begging for my life because he valued it infinitely more than his own. He was a fool, a violent, deeply broken, overprotective fool, and heaven help me, I still loved him. I let out a long, shaky sigh. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us. I didn't tell him to get up. Instead, I reached out my fingers, gently brushing away the dark strands of hair falling over his forehead, my thumb tracing the jagged white scar near his temple. Vance closed his eyes, leaning heavily into my touch, a ragged sob tearing its way out of his throat. He wrapped his massive arms around my hips, pressing his face against my stomach, seeking the heartbeat of his pup like a dying man seeking water. "We are not running to the Hamptons," I said softly, my fingers tangling in his dark hair. The pup gave a gentle rolling kick against Vance's cheek, acknowledging the sire's distress. "And you are not going to Brooklyn to start a war." Vance opened his eyes, looking up at me in confusion. "Liam, you operate in the shadows, Vance, but I operate on Wall Street," I said, a dangerous, razor-sharp smile forming on my lips. "The Volkovs want to hit my supply chain. Fine. But they launder their money through 3 real estate shell companies in Manhattan, companies that I have been tracking for a month." I tilted his chin up, forcing the terrifying Mafia boss to look at his billionaire Omega. "Put the guns away, darling," I whispered. "I am going to show you how to truly bleed a man dry, and I am going to do it entirely legally." The scent of blood and gunpowder is undeniably terrifying, but on Wall Street, the true smell of a massacre is freshly brewed espresso and hot laser printer ink. For 48 hours, my penthouse office became a fortified war room. I didn't need Kevlar, and I certainly didn't need a bunker in the Hamptons. I needed my business terminal, a pot of Jamaican Blue Mountain coffee, and 3 of the most ruthless corporate attorneys in Manhattan. The Volkov Bratva thought they were untouchable because they had armed soldiers in Brooklyn. They fundamentally misunderstood how modern power worked. They forgot that while they bled in the streets, their money lived on the island of Manhattan, hiding inside vulnerable shell companies. Execute the hostile buyout of Crescent Holdings. I ordered, my voice slightly raspy as I leaned over the expansive mahogany desk. I pressed 2 fingers to my temple, fighting a dull headache. Dump their secondary stocks to tank the valuation, then buy the debt through our proxy firm in the Caymans. I want their shipping logistics completely legally paralyzed by 4 p.m. Consider it done, Monsieur Liam, my lead attorney replied through the speakerphone, the rapid sound of typing echoing in the background. And the DA's office. Victoria handled the DA. I said, a faint, sharp smile touching my lips. My new favorite shopping partner had been absolutely delighted to use her father's political connections to freeze the Volkovs' municipal permits. Just freeze their accounts. Let us see how well a Mafia army fights when their paychecks bounce. I disconnected the call and sank heavily into my ergonomic leather chair. It was done. In less than 2 days, I hadn't fired a single bullet, yet I had severed the Volkov Bratva's financial jugular. They couldn't import their weapons. They couldn't pay their bribes. They were effectively bankrupt. As the adrenaline of the corporate slaughter finally evaporated, the reality of my biology crashed down on me with the force of a falling piano. I was nearly 26 weeks pregnant. The pup, perhaps sensing the sudden drop in my stress hormones, began to stretch, pushing a tiny hard heel directly against my ribs. I groaned, wrapping my arms around my swollen belly. Suddenly, a violent, overwhelming, entirely irrational urge gripped me. Nesting. It is a primal omega instinct. As the 3rd trimester approaches, the biology demands a safe, heavily scented space to prepare for the pup's arrival. Traditionally, an omega raids their alpha's closet, stealing heavy sweaters, worn shirts, and thick blankets drenched in the sire's pheromones to build a soft, impenetrable fortress of scent in the center of a bed. But my biology was irreparably fractured by trauma. When your alpha previously stripped you of your bank accounts, locked your credit, and threw you out into the freezing rain with $30 to your name, your brain rewires itself. Subconsciously, my omega instincts no longer associated softness or alpha scent with safety. To my traumatized brain, there was only one thing that guaranteed survival leverage: absolute, undeniable economic power. I didn't go to Vance's closet. I went to my fireproof wall safe. Breathing heavily, moving with the awkward, waddling grace of a pregnant penguin, I dragged the thick velvet duvet from the master bedroom and dropped it right into the center of my home office rug. Then I began to build. I lined the base of the nest with the original watermarked property deeds to the Le Ciel restaurant group. I fortified the edges with the freshly printed multi-million-dollar hostile takeover contracts of the Volkov shell companies. I cushioned the center with bearer bonds, platinum American Express statements, and certified stock certificates. The scent of crisp, high-grade linen paper security ink and binding glue filled the air. To anyone else, it smelled like a bank vault. To my warped, exhausted omega brain, it smelled like absolute, unbreakable security. I kicked off my slippers, crawled into the center of the velvet and paper fortress, and curled into a tight ball around my stomach. The crisp crinkle of $1 billion shifting beneath my weight was the most soothing lullaby I had ever heard. Within minutes, the exhaustion pulled me under. I didn't know how long I slept, but I was awakened by the subtle, familiar shift in the room's air pressure, crushed cedar, and winter frost. I blinked my eyes open, shifting slightly. The Volkov acquisition contracts crinkled loudly under my shoulder. Vance was standing in the doorway of the office. He had just returned from the docks, still wearing his dark tactical gear, though the Kevlar vest had been discarded. The terrifying 6'3" Mafia boss stood frozen, staring at the center of the rug. He looked at the velvet duvet. He looked at the scattered sea of legal documents, stock certificates, and banking ledgers. And then he looked at me, heavily pregnant and fiercely guarding a pile of financial paperwork, like a dragon hoarding gold. "Liam," Vance started, his deep voice laced with profound, absolute bewilderment. Are you sleeping on the Volkov bankruptcy filings?" They are surprisingly ergonomic," I grumbled, pulling a stack of municipal bonds closer to my chest, glaring at him defensively. "And don't step on the quarterly reports, they are load-bearing." Vance didn't laugh. He didn't mock me. The confusion in his striking gray eyes slowly melted into a dark, devastating realization. He was an alpha. He understood the biological imperative of the nest. And looking at my fortress of paper, he understood exactly why his sweaters weren't good enough anymore. He saw the physical manifestation of the trauma he had inflicted. I couldn't trust his scent to protect us. I could only trust my money. Vance's jaw tightened. He swallowed hard, the sharp line of his throat bobbing. He didn't apologize. Words were useless now. Instead, Vance slowly walked over to the heavy oak desk. He reached into the inner pocket of his tactical jacket and pulled out a thick black leather folio. It contained the master deeds to the syndicate's legitimate shipping ports and the controlling shares of his real estate holdings, his entire legal empire. Vance walked to the edge of my nest. He slowly sank to his knees, lowering his massive frame until he was at eye level with me. With agonizing gentleness, he slid the black leather folio directly under my pillow of bearer bonds. To block the drafts, Vance whispered, his voice thick with raw emotion. He didn't try to pull me out. He didn't try to replace my paper with his clothes. The absolute predator, the king of the New York underworld, simply bowed his head, resting his forehead against the edge of the velvet duvet, silently offering his empire to keep my nest warm. I looked at the dark strands of his hair, feeling the heavy, protective hum of his cedar scent wrapping around the edges of my financial fortress. For the first time in my life, I reached out freely, bearing my fingers into his hair. We were a disaster, a beautiful, heavily armed, financially ruthless disaster. But as the pup kicked happily against my ribs, I knew unequivocally that we were finally on the exact same side. The scent of fear in a corporate boardroom is entirely distinct from the scent of fear in a blood-stained alleyway. It doesn't smell like copper or adrenaline. It smells like expensive Tom Ford cologne turning sour, the metallic tang of nervous sweat, and the bitter ozone of overheating laptops. I sat at the head of the massive mahogany table in my midtown skyscraper, projecting absolute untouchable authority. At 38 weeks pregnant, my center of gravity was a distant memory, and my tailored suit jacket had long since been abandoned. I was resting my hands casually over the heavy, undeniable swell of my stomach, watching the board members of a rival logistics firm sweat through their custom shirts. The Volkov Bratva was a rotting corpse in the East River of New York's underworld, but their financial remnants were still highly lucrative. I was currently in the process of dissecting their shipping routes with the precision of a Wall Street surgeon. The acquisition price stands at 40 cents on the dollar. I said, my voice smooth cold and echoing slightly in the cavernous room. If you decline, my firm will simply short your remaining stock into oblivion by Friday morning. You have exactly 3 minutes to... I stopped. A sudden breathtaking spike of pain ripped through my lower abdomen, radiating outward with the violent intensity of a shattered bone. I gripped the edge of the mahogany table, my knuckles instantly turning bone white. Beneath the sharp agony, there was a sudden breaking sound, followed immediately by a warm rush of fluid soaking into my bespoke trousers. The boardroom went dead silent. The rival executives stared at me, paralyzed. My Omega biology, which had patiently allowed me to play the ruthless billionaire for the last 6 months, had violently seized control of the steering wheel. The pup was ready. Now. Marcus. I gasped out the word, barely a thin wheeze. The heavy doors of the boardroom slammed open before I even finished the syllable. Marcus, my head of security, didn't hesitate. He bypassed the terrified executives, scooped me up into his arms with terrifying efficiency, and barked into his earpiece. Code red. The water just broke. Get the chopper on the roof now and clear the airspace to Mount Sinai. The transition from the boardroom to the hospital was a blur of agonizing contractions and deafening helicopter rotors. The pain was a living, breathing entity twisting my spine and dragging my consciousness into a dark, primal haze. I remember the smell of sterile antiseptic, the glaring fluorescent lights of the VIP maternity wing, and the panicked voices of Dr. Eris's medical team. But mostly, I remember the absence of him. Vance, I choked out my fingers, digging desperately into the sterile white hospital sheets. My defensive blockers were completely gone, the room flooding with the heavy, distressed scent of a laboring Omega, searching blindly for its mate. Where is he? He is coming, Liam? Dr. Eris soothed, adjusting the IV line in my trembling hand. He was in Brooklyn negotiating the territory split. Arthur says he commandeered a helicopter. He is 5 minutes out. Another contraction hit, tearing a ragged, ugly scream from my throat. I squeezed my eyes shut, drowning in the blinding white pain. Then the air pressure in the delivery room violently shifted. The heavy double doors didn't just open, they were nearly taken off their hinges. A catastrophic wave of crushed cedar and biting winter frost swallowed the sterile smell of the hospital hole. Vance hit the floor running. He was still wearing a tailored dark charcoal suit, but the tie was ripped away. The collar unbuttoned his chest, heaving as if he had sprinted all the way from Brooklyn. The terrifying king of the New York underworld looked completely, utterly deranged with panic. "Liam!" Vance roared, his voice cracking violently. He threw himself to his knees beside the bed, his massive hands immediately finding mine, wrapping around my clammy, trembling fingers like a vice. The sheer heat radiating off his skin was a physical anchor. The chaotic blizzard of his alpha pheromones instantly narrowed, focusing into a heavy, suffocating blanket of absolute protection. "I am here. I am right here," Vance chanted, pressing his forehead against my sweat-drenched temple. His voice was shaking. "Look at me. You are safe. I have got you." The next 2 hours were a brutal, bloody war of attrition. I crushed the bones in Vance's hand, cursing his name, his syndicate, and his existence. And Vance took every insult, every scream, every ounce of my pain, bathing me in the scent of cedar and rain, whispering that he loved me until his voice went hoarse. And then a sharp, piercing cry echoed through the bright room. The sudden silence that followed was heavier than a collapsing building. I collapsed back against the pillows, my lungs burning the edges of my vision static. "A boy," Dr. Eris announced softly, wrapping the tiny, squalling, blood-slicked pup in a warm blanket before laying him directly onto my bare chest. A very healthy, very loud alpha pup. I looked down at the tiny, fragile weight resting against my heart. He had a shock of dark hair and was screaming with a set of lungs that undoubtedly belonged to a Mafia heir. But as I curled my exhausted arms around him, breathing in the sweet, milky scent of my own child, the world completely stopped. The Wall Street empire, the trauma, the divorce, it all evaporated into nothingness. Vance didn't speak. He buried his face against my shoulder, his broad back shaking with silent, devastating sobs. His large hand hovered over the pup, terrified to touch, until I gently reached out, grabbed his wrist, and pressed his palm flat against the baby's warm back. Hours later, the adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a profound aching exhaustion. The VIP recovery room was dimly lit, quiet, except for the rhythmic soft breathing of the pup sleeping in the bassinet beside my bed. I was propped up against the pillows, wearing a soft cashmere robe Victoria had sent over. Vance walked into the room. He had finally washed the blood and sweat from his hands, his suit jacket discarded. He looked older, stripped of every ounce of his terrifying armor. He didn't sit in the armchair. He walked to the edge of my bed and slowly, deliberately sank to his knees on the cold linoleum floor. He reached into his shirt, pulling out a thick, heavy black leather dossier. It wasn't the single folio he had offered my nest weeks ago. It was a staggering stack of legal documents. "What is this?" I whispered, my voice raspy. Vance looked up at me, his gray eyes clear, entirely devoid of pride or ego. "This is my absolute surrender." He placed the heavy dossier onto the edge of my mattress. "Those are the irrevocable transfer deeds to every piece of legitimate real estate the syndicate owns." Vance set his voice a low, steady rumble. "The shipping ports, the offshore accounts, the hedge funds, every liquid asset and property under my name. I signed them over to you while you were sleeping." I stared at the black leather, my heart skipping a beat. "Vance, this is your entire empire. You are leaving yourself with nothing." "I am leaving myself with everything," Vance corrected softly, his thumb gently brushing against my bruised knuckles. "You needed leverage to feel safe, Liam. You needed absolute economic power, so no alpha could ever lock you in a cage again. So I am giving you the cage. I am giving you the keys, the lock, and the ground it is built on." He bowed his head, resting his cheek against my knee through the blanket. "I am a penniless man now, Liam. If you throw me out into the rain tonight, I have $30 and nowhere to go. I am entirely, completely at your mercy." A thick lump formed in my throat. I looked at the man who had once frozen my bank accounts and discarded me, now willingly handing over billions of dollars just to prove I was the only thing of value he had left. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was a dark, twisted Wall Street-style romance built on the ashes of our past. I didn't say thank you. I didn't offer him forgiveness. Instead, I reached out my fingers tangling in his dark hair and pulled his face up toward mine. I leaned down, bridging the gap between the hospital bed and the floor, and pressed my lips to his. It wasn't a gentle, hesitant kiss. It was heavy, desperate, and tasted of salt and rebirth. It was the sealing of a new pact. The predator had finally surrendered his teeth, and the prey had taken the throne. As the scent of cedar and rain finally merged in perfect, unbreakable harmony in the quiet room, I pulled back just enough to look into his eyes. "You can stay." I whispered, a slow, triumphant smile touching my lips. "But you are changing the first diaper." It is said that absolute power has a distinct, unmistakable scent. On Wall Street, it usually smells like cold brew coffee, fresh ink on non-disclosure agreements, and the subtle electric ozone of an impending hostile takeover. But in my Upper East Side penthouse at 7 o'clock on a crisp Tuesday morning, absolute power smelled faintly of Tom Ford's Oud wood and mashed organic bananas. I stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirror in the master dressing room, expertly adjusting the cuffs of my bespoke charcoal three-piece suit. It was a flawless, aggressive cut tailored to perfection and hugging a waistline that had long since recovered from the grueling bloody trial of childbirth. 1 year. It had been exactly 12 months since the Volkov Bratva was financially dismantled, and exactly 12 months since Vance knelt on a hospital floor and surrendered his entire world to me. Today, I was the sole undisputed CEO of both a legitimate billion-dollar hospitality conglomerate and the most extensive newly legalized shadow logistics network on the eastern seaboard. I held the keys to the city. "He is doing it again, Liam. He is deliberately testing my patience." The deep, gravelly rumble of a voice that used to strike pure terror into the hearts of cartel bosses echoed from the hallway. I turned around, leaning casually against the mahogany island of the walk-in closet, and fought a desperate urge to burst out laughing. Vance stepped into the doorway. The 6'3" former king of the New York underworld was wearing a dark form-fitting Henley shirt that stretched over his massive biceps, gray sweatpants, and most devastatingly of all, a cream-colored linen apron draped over his broad chest. Balanced effortlessly on Vance's thick forearm was Julian, our 1-year-old alpha pup. Julian had inherited his sire's striking pale gray eyes, his impossibly strong lungs, and unfortunately the sheer, unadulterated stubbornness of a mob boss. Currently, the boy had both of his tiny, sticky hands tangled furiously in Vance's dark hair. He was babbling a string of high-pitched, demanding nonsense, while enthusiastically smearing a handful of banana puree directly against his father's collarbone. He is asserting his dominance. I pointed out dryly, walking over to the rack to retrieve a silk tie. "It is natural alpha behavior. You should be proud. He clearly takes after you." Vance scowled gently, but firmly prying the sticky, tiny fingers out of his hair. He grabbed a cloth he had thrown over his massive shoulder and wiped his neck. "I did not assert dominance by throwing oatmeal at Arthur this morning." Vance grumbled his tone, a mix of exasperation and profound adoration as he looked at the giggling baby. "The boy is a menace, and you," Vance continued, shifting his gaze to me, his eyes narrowing at my formal attire. "You are supposed to be on reduced hours, you promised." It is the final quarter, Vance. The acquisition of the Chelsea Harbor properties closes at noon. I have to be in the boardroom to finalize the signatures. Vance sighed, stepping closer. The scent of crushed cedar and winter frost washed over me. It was still there, embedded in his biology, but it was no longer suffocating, chaotic, or desperate. It was a warm, steady, rhythmic hum of absolute devotion. He shifted Julian to his other hip. The baby immediately grabbed Vance's ear with a happy squeal, exposing a line of tiny new teeth. Using his free hand, the former Mafia boss took the silk tie from my fingers. "Lift your chin," Vance murmured. I obeyed instinctively. The ruthless predator, the man who had officially signed away billions of dollars and transferred every ounce of his legal and illegal power into my name, stepped into my space and expertly knotted my tie. He was technically speaking the poorest man in my penthouse. He didn't own the roof over his head, the armored Maybach in the garage, or the platinum bank accounts that paid for his custom apron. He was entirely, completely at my mercy, and he had never looked more at peace. "You are having a proper lunch today. Real food, not just a protein shake in spite," Vance ordered, smoothing the silk flat against my chest. His large, calloused hands lingered warmly over my heart. If Marcus texts me and says you skipped a meal to read contracts, I am walking into that boardroom and carrying you out over my shoulder. I do not care if the mayor is there. I smiled, leaning up to press a soft, lingering kiss to his rough jaw right over the faint white scar near his temple. You wouldn't dare, I whispered playfully. You are an unemployed stay-at-home father. My security detail would tackle you. A dark, dangerous smirk ghosted across Vance's lips, a fleeting glimpse of the terrifying underworld king he used to be. Let them try. Just be home by 6, Liam. Chef Marcel is making the duck confit you like. And this tiny tyrant, he nodded to Julian, who was now sleepily chewing on the collar of Vance's Henley, refuses to go to sleep unless he can bury his face in your neck and smell your jasmine. I reached out, running a hand gently through Julian's dark curls, feeling the soft, grounding warmth of my family radiating through the room. I picked up my Platinum American Express card from the valet tray, the very same weapon I had thrown onto a wet restaurant tablecloth exactly 1 year ago, and slid it smoothly into my breast pocket. I will be home by 6. Have the wine decanted, I promised, turning toward the door. I walked toward the private elevator, my polished shoes clicking sharply against the slate floors with the heavy, unyielding cadence of a man who owned the world. I had spent months running from the shadows, terrified of being locked away, starving for autonomy, and fighting a desperate war for my own survival. But as the steel elevator doors began to slide shut, I glanced back down the long, sunlit hallway. I watched the terrifying, legendary Mafia boss expertly rock our son to sleep, gently checking the temperature of a baby bottle against the inside of his heavily tattooed wrist. Looking at them, I finally understood the truth. True love isn't about hiding someone from the world to keep them safe. It isn't about control, and it certainly isn't about cages, no matter how much gold and velvet they are built with. True love is handing over the keys to the kingdom. It is stripping yourself bare, offering up your throat, and giving the person you love the absolute, undeniable power to fly away. Because when you finally give them the sky, you know that at the end of the day, they will always choose to fly back home to you.